Welcome to the Nonprofit Leadership Series, where we explore the evolving world of mission-driven leadership. I'm your host, Ken Cerini. Today, I'm joined by Ron Abad, CEO of Community Housing Innovations. We'll talk about the changing face of the nonprofit leadership, the power of collaboration, and how organizations can stay mission-focused in an uncertain economy. Let's jump right into the conversation. So first of all, thanks, Ron, for joining me today.
Thanks, Ken. Thanks for this opportunity to
So I guess the first thing is, how have you seen the role of nonprofit leader evolve over the last decade? I mean, the last decade has been pretty dynamic, and we've definitely seen changes. So what have you seen?
it's clearly like in any industry, post-COVID, but particularly the last 10 years, the need for a CEO to be a CEO, chief communicator, a chief collaborator, a leader internally and externally, building partnerships, a great knowledge of a lot of areas, not just their specific sphere, of service or focus. Pretty similar as a corporate leader, a leader in not-for-profit and government, really serving, serving those that you serve, serving your leadership, your team, the people that you serve, the particular sphere, but really being a great leader externally as well, building partnerships, looking at things also from a business side. As you know, not-for-profits, it's not so much about the profits, but about building and cultivating, making sure that our organizations are healthy and lean. So a CEO leader, has to really just be a broad leader, strategic, visionary, but a very strong knowledge of their particular area. I've seen that
What,
grow, and just evolve over the past years. Yeah.
so from your perspective, what do you think are the key aspects or the key strengths that a leader needs to have today?
I think as a leader, you got to be passionate and really have a heart and a mind for what you do, for the services you do. It's more than a job. I really personally believe you got to really get a sense, have the heart, the pulse of those that you serve. It's not a job, it's a passion, it's personal, it's mission driven. And the mission, and I think you got to be personally committed to the cause, whether it's aging or housing, senior services, youth. I think you got to have sort of a personal understanding of who you're serving, who you're supporting, who you're using your gifts, and your skills and accomplishments and competencies to support. So as a leader, and I believe you got to really serve your team, serve the people that you work for and that you work on behalf, and be a voice and a strategic leader at the same time. Those characteristics, I think that any CEO in any industry, any leader needs to have: one, passion, a commitment, and sort of a great understanding of what's the need, what's the service out there.
I've seen leadership change over the years, especially as, if you think about it, most of us as leaders, we've learned from the people who came before us.
That's right.
So we learned from either the silent generation or baby boomers. And now
Yep.
we're kind of in an environment where we're leading individuals that think very, very differently from how the baby boomers think, who
Right.
think, I mean, you've got Gen Z, you got Gen X, you got millennials, you got all these different generations now, that you're trying to lead. How do you kind of balance your leadership style among the different generations that are out there, and how do you ensure that through that balance you're effective?
You got to stay connected. You got to stay connected to everyone, whether it's Gen Z or any population, particularly that population. You got to have them as part of the conversation. You got to have them at the table. You have to have different types of tables, right? So the sort of whole linear approach may not always work, and you got to get out there. I believe in going out, visiting sites, visiting staff, visiting employees, partners, and really meeting people just to get a greater sense and understanding. So listening is important. As a leader, as a CEO, we're constantly talking and constantly, vision and strategy. And, you got to sort of take a time, a pause to listen, to really hear the pulse, to get their take. So I really highly recommend. I work on it all the time and try to work on it and develop and evolve. And how can I listen and understand what's going on? It's a different generation. So it can't be like what I've learned from previous organizations or previous leaders I work with. Like I got to learn from the folks that I work with together. And younger generations, we just have to stay connected with them and just learn they're moving at a different pace generally than we are. those that are much older generation. So as a leader, you really want to stay connected. That's my biggest recommendation.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point in the fact that, when you think about leadership and you think about where you learn from, you're learning from kind of everyone. You're learning from the people who you serve, you're learning from the people who work with you, whether they are part of your leadership team or whether they're part of your line staff.
Absolutely, you got to, and you're constant learning. You're a lifelong learner, like we say, always say, always learning, changing, getting to understand what's the language, what's the thought pattern, what are the desires, and that's for anything. If when we discuss benefits, we need to talk to our young people, even though they may not be thinking about retirement. When we think about service to those, particularly in my sphere in housing, how could young people look at housing and the need for housing much differently than some of the older generations? So spending time with them and connecting and having different circles of leadership at all levels, that you're part of, and that you're including people across the board, I think is critical in this time.
What have you been doing to kind of build and grow your leadership team?
Very expansive. So it's not just traditional C-suite, it's not just my vice president executives. I really try to get a lot of leadership thought patterns, et cetera. So right now we are in a mid-year strategic plan of action SWOT, right? Sort of get it,
Yep.
where are we in the middle of the year, right here in July? What are our strengths, our weaknesses, and opportunities and threat? Old approach. But in that, I really need to get to hear everyone. So I'm going out, I'm doing CEO tours, visiting all our sites in Long Island, in New York City, Hudson Valley, and Westchester. And as you know, Ken, we're a large not-for-profit in the housing area. We serve various counties all throughout New York region, 800 employees, approximately $125 million operating budget. And we serve different populations in permanent housing, affordable housing, shelter, first-time home buyer. So these are different markets, different regions, different people. So I really need to get out and really, spend time with them and hear thoughts and recommendations and input at all levels, not just my executive leadership team.
So you just said you're a large organization. A lot of the organizations are much smaller than you are.
Yes.
How does the thought process, the leadership qualities and traits, and how you lead, how does that change from a large organization to a small organization? And how does some of your style translate to that smaller organization?
I mean, scaling is one thing. So depending on the size, it could be, not-for-profit of 10 people versus, 1,000 versus 5,000. But the leadership qualities, I don't think change, the scaling changes, the amount of the team, how large your team changes. But whether you're a leader of a not-for-profit of 10 people and you serve a specific, specific sphere in a local community, you still got to be a leader. You still got to really stay connected to the community, stay connected to those you serve, really support your leadership, your team, even if it's a small team. The qualities don't change, the scale changes, but the qualities are the same at different scales.
You talked before about the fact that you're going through your mid-year strategic review, mid-year strategic thought process. So when you kind of look at what you do from a leadership perspective, you've got the macro aspect of it. What am I doing from an organizational perspective? What am I doing to drive the organization forward and be forward thinking and the large brand and all that other stuff. But then you also have the micro component of it, that day-to-day making sure that there's that decision making and getting your sleeves rolled up and your hands dirty at times and stuff like that. How do you kind of balance the macro and the micro components of leadership? And do you have any rough formula as to how much time is macro versus micro, or does that kind of change as the day goes?
Yeah, it changes as day go. I mean, you sort of schedule strategically, but on the day to day, we have to have our directors, we have to have a line staff, our middle managers involved in the entire process. That's how we balance the two, right? If it was all executive leadership, on this review, it wouldn't work. It's sort of a cross review that we try to do across the board. Very, I'm very reliant on my vice presidents and senior vice presidents, right, to get that information flowing up so that we could look at it from a macro standpoint. As CEO, I have to balance that we're getting those voices and recommendations from all, not just from a handful, right? We get the day-to-day from those who are running our shops and our programs, our services on a day-to-day basis. So you got to get them at the table. You got to hear their voice, They got to be part of the conversation. You got to really stay connected to them. And that's what you get. I look at the big picture, but I zoom in and zoom out, right? Sort of have, a basic larger strategic plan that I'm looking at on a daily basis, almost on an hourly basis, right? But it's really zooming in and zooming out and just knowing that sort of balance, like you mentioning. The micro is part of the macro, and the macro consists of a lot of micros, right? So no matter what, you got to look at the entire picture. You can't be a CEO who's just stuck in your office, just looking at big picture. You really need to know and not get too much in the weeds, but you sort of need to know what's growing and what's not growing, across the
What
organization.
what are the tools you use, or what is your process for allowing information to percolate up to you?
I have daily executive meetings with my executives. I have a weekly executive call. I have a monthly leadership call. I have quarterly town halls, where I do a CHI town hall, which we sort of give a presentation and allow questions there. And then we do a lot of community things. We just had a great picnic, last week, 2 weeks ago, where we go out there and just everyone enjoys. So it's an opportunity for us to connect. And that way we really get to hear people and voice. And right now, like I said, during the summer, I'm doing CEO tours. So going to the sites, patting folks on their back, giving them kudos, where needed, et cetera, but also listening to their recommendations. So you got to get out, as a CEO, I highly recommend that you get out and really know your shop, know your people, know your product.
What sort of things have you learned through these CEO tours that have helped you to be a better leader?
That things are not always flowing all throughout. What I may be communicating may not be flowing all throughout, right? So right now, part of it, we already know that how do we continue to send the message out, across the board to your question, right? And how do I really get to hear the concerns? And I'm not just hearing them from our executive leadership, right? So it's a balance of not stepping on the foot of your leadership, supporting them, not undermining them, but also getting to hear the voices of as many as possible, right? So as a leader, you really want to open, encourage open conversation, open communication. So we're looking at different tools like an HR share drive, right, where employees can sort of communicate, an employee newsletter where employees can sort of have input on what's put in a newsletter to share with other people. We're looking at all those as part of our larger communications plan, but it's always evolving. You can never do, I believe it's better to over communicate than under communicate. And clarity, I always believe, is the first law of communication. So as a CEO, I'm the chief communicator, right, as well, right? My job is to make sure that we're always communicating. I'm always communicating, not just the vision, not just the big picture strategy about how we're doing and how everyone's doing across the board. And that takes work, and we're growing and we can do better and always do better. But I think that's the goal. You have to be the chief communicator as well.
I mean, there's always going to be some level of evolution that takes place, and that's
Absolutely.
that's really what it's all about. It's constantly assessing information and looking for ways to incorporate that and to improve.
Absolutely. Without a doubt. Definitely.
We've been hearing a lot out there about the large level of turnover that's either happening or going to be happening at the C-suite among nonprofit organizations. Um, what should nonprofit organizations do to ensure that they have in place future leaders, not just leaders for today, but as we start to see some of this migration at the C-suite level or people retiring and stuff, both from a large organization perspective like yours, where maybe you already have those multi-layers of leadership team, and also maybe smaller organizations that don't have the luxury of having those layers of leadership team.
That's right. I mean, I think on one end, it is a good thing that there's some evolving change. I think if you're a CEO of a not-for-profit and you've been there for decades, there are pluses, but there's some minuses in that, right? So new leadership, new blood is critical, particularly in the not-for-profit industry where some leaders can be there for 20, 30 years and never grow, and the organizations don't grow, right, as a result. So I think it's a good thing that there's some type of turnover. It's also a good thing that the face of the CEOs change. So we're getting a lot of new leaders, new CEOs who actually come from the neighborhoods and the areas that they are CEOs over, right? They've come up the ranks. They didn't just get appointed or sort of just get a CEO job. These are folks that have come up the ranks, like myself. I've come up the ranks 30 years in housing, but everything from a director to, coordinator, director to a vice president to a senior vice president, a COO, an assistant commissioner, sort of up the ranks, work through the ranks. So you get to see everything and live it, firsthand. So I think a good point of the evolving is the changing face of the CEO, where you're getting a lot of people who represent, who actually look like the people they serve. One, which is much needed in our society, and two, really get an understanding and have an understanding of their areas. The risk is that if you're not cultivating and building leaders at the vice president, an executive vice president level, then you get stuck, and oftentimes you get founder syndrome, you get other syndromes where CEOs don't leave because of the fear that they haven't built a succession plan or have cultivated other leaders within their shop. So my lessons learned in 30 years, what I do is I have a lot of great leaders that I've promoted, that I'm building and developing, and they're part of everything. They're just not in their one section. They're part of our conversation, across the board. And there I'm really developing them, being a coach. I look at myself also as the chief coach, coaching
Mhm.
them and growing them. So whenever I decide to move to the next level, or whenever it is decided I move to the next level, at least there's a bench that's being built that can there. We're in a time where we need great leadership with great ideas, just fresh ideas for a fresh new time when things are evolving. There's a lot of uncertainty. So you got to sort of build yourself, build a team, and look at the big picture. I learned the hard way, for years, just grinding and grinding and grinding, and wish I had a coach, which I wish I
Right.
had executive coach, which I wish I had a mentor. I didn't for many years. I struggled, still struggled, with that. So now I have the opportunity to mentor and to coach others,
That's
and
awesome.
it's a beautiful thing, I think.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I see is, and you kind of touched on it a little bit, is that, organizations go through life cycles.
Yes,
So you mentioned that sometimes you have a leader who's kind of in a role and the organization doesn't grow and becomes stagnant because the leader's stagnant. And it's sometimes it's because, some leaders are good at, developing systems and controls and things like that. Other leaders might be better at being the face of an organization and getting things out, but they can't really develop systems and stuff. So it's a matter of, again, as you said, assembling that team that has all of the skill sets that are necessary, but then also understanding where an organization is within its life cycle so
that's right.
that when you move to a new leader, that new leader can advance on what's already existing.
And a new leader, actually, you look at what you know what your own strengths are. I know what my strengths are. I know where I'm not that strong in. So I want to build people who are
Wait, there's
strong in
something you're
areas.
not strong in?
Or I don't know. You know what I'm saying? Like an improve upon, you know what I mean? Improve upon it. Or people who just can do better. I mean, sort of part of being a leader is I think leaders develop leaders, right?
Mhm.
And leaders know what they're stronger at, right? So I do a lot of focus now on advocacy, on housing development, on sort of pushing the envelope across the board, in the industry. I'm building and development. I play the role of chief communicator. And then I have folks who are strong in the technical aspects and transactional aspects. They're strong there. I'm strong in technical and tactical and operational, but I think they're better at it, so I can focus on being the CEO and the public face and really develop and grow us as an organization. So you got to know yourself in that process. And if you're sort of, I'm not going to say insecure, but you're not self-aware of what your strengths are, where other folks that are smarter than you, can jump in, then you're going to be stuck in a particular aspect.
All right. So if you were talking to someone who is looking to move into a leadership or C-suite role, what advice would you give them in terms of, things that they should think about in terms of kind of moving into that, C-suite role of a mission-driven organization?
It's a combination of one, the old values never change, Ken. Hard work, work ethic, passion, discipline, organized, life learner, right? These are leadership qualities that no matter what age you are, no matter what industry, no matter what region, you need to be a leader. That's just my personal. You got to have a heart for what you do and a heart for the people that you serve. I think for me, that's number one. You got to build your skill and your competencies right across the board. You got to do your time. You gotta work and do your time and really get to know there. If you're interested in being a leader or CEO just for the title, or the perception of it, you're sort of in the wrong area. But if you're doing it because you really want to lead, which is really, I believe, service, you want to serve people, then you're going to have to build the competencies, and the characteristics along the way in those opportunities. Can I think, I was a number two and number three for like 15 years before I became a CEO. I served other CEOs in a few organizations for a number of years and learned good from them and learned bad from them, right? And just so I served and I learned everything possible that I can learn, right? Until my opportunity came up. And then when it came up, I was prepared. So preparation is still needed, some of the old school values, I hate to say old school, but those values of work ethic, preparation, planning, education are much needed, particularly in this new environment, which is so uncertain in so many ways. Those things they can't take from you, even though the winds of change, politically, economically change, you still need to have leadership qualities, no matter what market or what environment you're in.
I mean, leadership is all about how you're able to um, take your team and get your team to follow you in terms of what needs to get done within the organization, so you can maximize the benefit and the potential that you drive to the individuals you serve. So
Absolutely. And leadership is changing. It's the follow, I underline the follow, yes, to follow you as the leader, but really you're building them and you're making them leaders, right?
leaders, yeah.
You're going together in the same direction. You're just providing a certain coaching, vision, strategy that they may not have as they move that. But I think leaders develop leaders. So I'm really trying to move all of them in the same direction.
So speaking of change, I'm going to change direction on you a second here and talk a little bit about collaboration and
Oh,
community collaboration. So what are some of the most successful collaborations that Chai has been part of, and what made them work?
collaborations is key. It's key for any CEO leader. One, I am involved in multiple trade associations.
Hmm.
That's one way, so president of the board of not-for-profit Westchester, member of Human Services Council, and serving on various boards. I serve on various boards to support those areas, Leviticus Fund, et cetera, where I believe. So collaboration is also, particularly for the CEO, it's not only about your organization. You got to build partnerships. You got to build collaborations, and not just with folks in your particular industry. You got to really have cross collaboration, cross partnerships. One, of course, for your area, for your organization. What are you not strong in, right? So we're housing, we're building, trying to build collaborations with medical providers, with substance use providers, primary care, with banks, with developers, with corporations, where we're building those partnerships and collaborations. That is critical, vital, Ken, in this industries. Not-for-profits, like, CEOs cannot act alone. You cannot, it's lonely at the top, but you cannot be by yourself in this industry during these times. A I'm the chief collaborator, right? I'm the chief communicator, the chief developer, right? I'm the chief collaborator, right? I have to collaborate and look for partnerships, not only in the areas that we don't serve, we don't have strength in, but really to build unity, right? To build strengths, to build our competencies across the board. So I'm always seeking to collaborate in many ways, and I encourage that for all CEO leaders.
How do you find the right organizations to collaborate with, or the right partners, and how do you build that trust so that you have that shared vision that you're looking for as a nonprofit organization?
You got to reach out. You got to spend time having coffee, lunches, right? You got to get out of your office. You got to meet people, and meeting people in coffee, lunches. That's what I do. Just meet them, at places, and you build friendships. You're building friendships, right? And you're building associations, and then you're seeing if there's commonality in what you do. And from there, I think you build some formal, partnerships and collaborations, whether through contract or MOU. But I think it starts with just friendships, right? You got to build friends. You got to have allies. You have people, partners, colleagues, people that, And you can get technical. I get into the point that I started building advisory committees, kitchen cabinets, a few people I can trust in certain areas and for certain matters I can call that they, advisors, circle of advisors, and that leads to collaborations. So if you're constantly looking like, who can I reach out to in this particular area for a particular need, and then not always look for what you receive, but what you can give, right? Like, how can I help you? How can I support you? Or I'm a sounding board. Feel free to call me when you're griping about your board, at 6 in the morning. I'm in my office at 6:30. You can call me. You don't need to get too, personal on it, but I'm your sounding board. And that builds friendships and partnerships. So I have people like that call me, that I call them on these things. Because it at times, as it could be lonely at the top, but you got to have your partnerships and collaborators across the board.
Yeah, I think that's super important. Um, in your experience, when you kind of look at your funders, um, how can funders better support that whole collaboration within the sector as opposed to maybe competition among nonprofits? I mean, nonprofits are one of those few industries where you see less competition and more cooperation. But again, how can funders help to foster and facilitate some of that collaboration taking place?
Well, I've seen it like, for example, I've reached out to funders and say, listen, I know this particular organization. Do you know of an organization that does very well in this area? Right? Can you introduce us? Right? And then I'll bring my team along to meet with them, and we'll do site tours. It's like, can we tour your site? We do housing, right? So there's some best practices we can learn from the collaboration. Government, I think the funders play a role in building those partnerships, but you got to really reach out to them and sort of really ask that they could be a technical partner with you. So I believe government is our funders are our partners, and we're in this together. So they can reach out to me, they can reach out to my team for anything, not just our relationship, on a contract basis.
Mhm.
So it's the same thing. It's building partnerships with all our partners. We do the same with all our banks. We do the same with corporations. We do the same with developers. We do the same with government partners, with elected officials. It's a partnership where there's a win-win. And as long as I think you, as a the executive director, CEO, communicate that, people know that you always want a partnership for a win-win situation.
Again, how do you, and I know you said we talked a little bit about how do you identify which are the right organizations? I mean, there's a lot of different businesses out there. They may not always have the same aligned thought process as you. And I know you said you go and you meet with them and have, but kind of how do I pre-identify which organizations or which companies you want to kind of explore a collaboration with, or you just talk to anybody and kind of feel it out?
Yeah, I really talk to a lot of people and feel it out over time and do some research. It is relationship. It's built on relationship and built on reputation and getting out there and hearing about people and exploring and research and development still stands. I think we also I'm a chief researcher, so I'm constantly researching and looking for those new opportunities, like who's doing something different in housing than we're doing, right? So we're like community housing. We know what we do. A big thing we're focusing on is how can we be much more innovative? The I and CHI, what can we do? What are the different models in housing that we can begin to explore? And who do we need to meet? Where do we need to travel to explore these new models and not just walk the regular government, funding route that we have? And, preserve that, of course, but look for new innovative approaches and models moving forward.
Cool. Um, So from your perspective, what does true community-centered collaboration look like in practice, especially when it comes to housing advocacy and services?
Oh wow, well it's being out there. Give me a second, sorry. It's being out there in the community. Community centered means it's exactly that, community centered. You got to know if I'm serving in the Bronx or in Newburgh and Poughkeepsie where I serve, I got to know the area. We got to know the people. We got to know the landscape. We got to get out there. It's not just our government partners. It's got to be community centered. And it doesn't have to come from me, the CEO, all the time, right? It can come from our staff or people that live in these certain areas and we can get information, but you got to know your community. You got to really be involved in your community. And there are different ways to be involved. You can't, as a CEO, be everywhere and do everything. So you got to make sure that you have people that can be community centered and know the neighborhood. So we are involved in trade associations and local community boards in every community that we serve. We try to form relationships with leadership, the elected officials, but also with other not-for-profits that are in that community. And sometimes it just takes for you to really spread that opportunity to the rest of your staff, and as opposed to just you. You know?
Right. So we're kind of running out of time. So what's on the horizon for Chai?
We are looking to expand beyond New York. We're big on that. We're looking for other, of course, continue to do affordable housing and permanent housing. We're looking to workforce housing, which is housing sort of right in the middle. It's not low and moderate income. It's not, of course, luxury housing. It's the housing that accommodates 90% of our population. So we're looking to do more in that area because there's a need. We see that even in this time of uncertainty, particularly on government funding, I'm looking for opportunity. How do I protect, preserve what I have in partnership with others, right? In an uncertain economy and uncertain there, we know this too will pass. But how do we protect and preserve what we have? How do we maximize everything? How do we look for collaborations, across the board in those areas that I think that someone else can do better than we can do, or where we can, but also what are the opportunities out there? So I'm very opportunity focused. Like, okay, I see this maybe fading, this is changing, but maybe there's a new opportunity in housing. Is it new low income tax credits? Is it new market tax credits, right? It's just new, and is this something we can venture in that I really have to sort of go out there and really build relationships and build? So we're looking at new innovative services beyond housing in the home ownership space, in affordable housing across the board that we CHI can tap into. And that's what I encourage every CEO leader is like, look for the opportunities during these challenging times, right? When there's some uncertainty in the not-for-profit landscape, protect what you have as much as you can, be very proactive, and be opportunity focused as much as possible.
Awesome. So Ron, this was great. We're kind of out of time. So really appreciate your insight. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
And
Ken.
thanks for joining us on this episode of the Nonprofit Leadership Series. Again, a big thanks to Ron for sharing his insights on leadership collaboration in the nonprofit sector. If you enjoyed the conversation, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and check out our other episodes featuring changemakers driving impact across our communities. Until next time, keep leading the purpose. Thank you.
Take care. Thanks. Appreciate it.